Every now and again, we're asked the question, why do we homestead? And it always gets me thinking and remembering.
Brown butter.
Recently, we were asked this question, and it brought me back to the days of living off of Dan & Light and Fit yogurt and buying fat-free cheese. Fat-free cheese! For us, our journey started with health problems, imbalances, and infertility. Basically, our bodies telling us that they were struggling, and as a response to that, we began changing our diet. For years, I did everything I could to be healthy. I studied nutrition in college, counted calories, minimized fat, and would opt for the soy-based veggie burger instead of the all-beef variety. All healthy choices, I thought. But my body was telling me otherwise.
All right, guys, who wants eggs?
Early in our journey, around 2012, my sister mentioned eating unprocessed foods might help, and it was like a light bulb went off in my head. What if all of these health foods that I was eating, that in reality had a long list of ingredients, chemicals, additives, and preservatives, were actually making me unwell? What if instead we ate only the whole foods that people have always eaten, the ones with real and basic ingredients? And that's how it all began. We swapped our processed foods for real foods, at first from the grocery store, and then we began sourcing things from local farmers. Then we started volunteering on those farms. Eventually, we started our own garden at home and got backyard chickens. And then in 2020, we bought our 5-acre homestead and now grow most of the food that feeds our family year-round. Changing our diet has changed our lives. And one of the things that brings me the most joy is getting to nourish our family day in and day out with the best homegrown food on the planet and see them thrive. So come along for a fall day on our homestead and see how we put to use all of the foods that we've grown and raised. It's officially soup season, and soups and stews make up a huge part of our diet. They are like the optimal food in my opinion. They're easy to make, economical, feed a crowd, and are so nourishing and easy to digest, and a great way to use all of the homegrown foods that we have stored away. I start the day like I do most Mondays, by getting a whole chicken slow cooking. I do this by filling the Dutch oven so it covers about 2/3 of the chicken with water. I like to make the broth as I'm slow cooking the chicken because I found that this is the best way to make the most gelatinous, flavorful broth. You could also throw a few chicken feet in there to get extra gelatinous broth.
That sounds yummy.
I like to add a splash of apple cider vinegar to the water while the chicken is cooking and making the broth because it helps to draw out the extra nutrients from the bones. I bring it to a boil and then let it slow cook for the rest of the day at 200 degrees in our oven. Or you could do this on low in a crock pot, which is what I used to do before we had our current oven. Right now, we're raising about 50 to 60 meat chickens per year, which means we have about a chicken a week for our family. I foresee needing to go up to 2 chickens a week in the next few years, but for now, this is working well.
1, 2, 3.
For lunch, we're gonna have a rich, creamy cheeseburger soup. So this is similar to a creamy potato soup, but it's even cheesier and uses ground beef. When making soups and stews, I always find it helpful to chop all of my veggies first so that everything is ready to go, and that makes getting the soup together really easy. So for this soup, I'm using the staples: garlic, onions, carrots, and potatoes. Soups are also a great way to use up those small, puny vegetables from the garden that don't store as well as the larger, more robust ones. For instance, these small potatoes will get soft in storage more quickly than larger ones, so we try to use them up first. After the vegetables are all chopped, I saute the ground beef in plenty of butter, then add the veggies in. You can use any fat to saute everything, but butter makes it extra creamy in this soup. After the veggies start to get soft, I add the potatoes and a splash of Worcestershire sauce. This is followed by sprinkling a thickener over the veggies and mixing it in so it doesn't clump. I like to use tapioca starch as a thickener, but you could also use arrowroot starch, cornstarch, or just a regular flour. Then I add 4 cups of broth and bring this to a boil and then reduce the heat to a simmer, put the lid on it and let it sit for about 20 minutes to cook those potatoes. We don't do much in the way of taking vitamins besides regular cod liver oil, but there are a few things that I try to make sure we get into our diet every day or close to it, and broth is one of them. This often comes in the form of soups or stews, or I'll use it for cooking rice or grains, or sometimes we'll just sip on a cup of broth or add an egg to it and make a simple egg drop soup. The other 2 things I try to make sure to get in most days are liver and something fermented. For me, I usually start the day with these as part of my breakfast. I like just getting those in early and then it's done and really helps give me good nourishment at the start of the day.
This is the farthest you can get.
After the potatoes are soft, I add in cream, shredded cheddar cheese, and seasonings. It's so crazy to think about the fact that I used to be completely afraid of anything besides skim milk, fat-free cheese, or light yogurt, but not only do we feel way better eating the whole version, it also tastes way better. Boom.
Probably just get out of my cage. I can just step on. I have it. No, we're great. I got it. Mommy, I thought it was nice.
The other things on our list for today were harvesting and processing grapes and making cheese. You know the old saying, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade? Well, that's how we feel about grapes. We have wild grapes growing all over our property. I believe they're Concord grapes, and this was a really good year for the grapes. The vines were loaded, more than we've ever seen before. It's been on our list to harvest them for a good month and a half, and we're just getting to them now. The good thing about that is that after the first frost, the grapes are supposed to get much sweeter, but the downside is that we waited a bit longer than I would have liked, and some of them have started to dry out and shrivel.
Ooh, Mommy, look at all these. I got a whole bunch.
We still got a great grape haul, and this is going to turn into a beautiful grape juice that we'll can in pint-sized jars. I don't sweeten it before canning. We just strain the juice after heating it on the stove for a good hour or 2 with some water, and this way I can add the sweetener as needed when we're using it in a recipe later. Our favorite way to use the grape juice is to use it in gelatin gummies, which is another great way to get in gelatin besides in broth. Everything about these gummies is super simple, including the ingredients. They're made with just high quality gelatin and juice. And then I like to add in some honey or maple syrup for a little bit of sweetener since I didn't sweeten the juice originally. This is one that we love to have on hand as an easy snack or sweet treat. I was really hoping we'd also have the chance to get cheese done this afternoon, but as things usually go, we're scrambling just to get the grape juice wrapped up by dinner time, so we'll have to get to the cheese a bit later. We harvested around 150 butternut squashes this year, and we often get asked how we use them. We love them roasted as a side dish, pureed for baked goods, or for adding to different dishes. Every week I like to puree a butternut squash or two just to have on hand. That pureed squash is perfect for adding to soups, rice and beans, chili, or I've even added it to things like meatloaf. It's also great for turning into baked goods like pancakes or muffins, and once the squash is roasted and pureed, most of the work is done, and then I find myself making these recipes way more often than I do when the butternut squash is just sitting on the shelf in the basement. To make the pureed butternut squash, just slice the squash in half and remove the seeds, and then bake at 350 to 400 degrees for about 45 minutes to an hour, depending on the size of your squash. After it's cooked and soft, just take it out, let it cool before scooping out all of that flesh, and then to puree it, I usually just mash it with a fork, but you could also use an immersion blender. For dinner tonight, alongside our roasted chicken, I'm also gonna roast some butternut squash. So our favorite way to do this is to peel and cube the butternut squash. A standard vegetable peeler works great for peeling the thick skin off, and then I add it to some fat in a pan. I happen to have some bacon grease that needed to be used, so that's what I'm doing here, but butter, olive oil, coconut oil, whatever you want to do would be great to cook this butternut squash in. We like to add a little salt and pepper, Italian seasonings, and garlic powder, mix it all together, put it in a single layer on a baking pan, and then pop it in the oven at 425 degrees for about 30 minutes. You could eat it just like that and it would be delicious, but the secret sauce in our house is to heat up some butter on the stove and drizzle that browned butter and a little bit of honey over the roasted squash and mix it all together. It's so good. It's butter. Brown butter.
Brown butter.
This is also one we love to bring to gatherings with all of the holidays coming up. For the chicken, I ladle out all of the broth, so now the chicken broth is ready to go for the next batch of soup, and then I like to broil the chicken for a few more minutes before serving to crisp up the skin. We still had 5 gallons of milk in the fridge to turn into cheese, so Jim made a batch of Farmhouse Cheddar. We'll link that recipe below, but basically after getting a milk cow, we'd already mastered mozzarella and really wanted to make a simple hard cheese. Farmhouse Cheddar is about as easy as it gets when it comes to hard cheeses, so that's been our go-to recipe ever since. Well, cheese making used to be this really intimidating thing that would require all of our time and attention. Over time, after making it so many times, now it's one of those things that he can just make in the background and doesn't require the same mental focus as it used to. The only extra ingredient that you really need to make this cheese is rennet, which I can link our favorite option below, but besides that, Jim was determined to figure out how to do this without investing in things like a cheese press and just uses common kitchen items to rig up his own press. This cheese really is as accessible as it gets, but it's also delicious and really versatile. We typically grate it and use it on top of so many dishes that would call for shredded cheddar, like pizza, casseroles, or sprinkling on top of soups. Fall is such a sweet time of abundance on the homestead. Our basement has become a fully stocked grocery store where we can pull fresh produce from well beyond the winter months. And having a family milk cow has changed the way we eat in so many ways. Never could we have imagined that dairy could be such a significant part of our diet, but when you figure in having a constant supply of butter, cheese, yogurt, sour cream, not to mention just fresh milk for drinking, it's hard to imagine any other way of living. What we keep coming back to is food is simple. It doesn't have to have a list of ingredients a mile long with things you can't pronounce. It doesn't have to come in pretty, convenient packaging. And honestly, our experience is that when it does, those are typically red flags. We've found the best recipes are the simplest recipes, with simple, well-sourced ingredients.